Katz, thank you. I'm not quite sure how I got conned into doing this by Katz, but I did. And she said to me, what's it going to be called? And this is after we'd had a couple of drinks. I said, When Worlds Collide. It seemed like a kind of good catch-all title without having really thought what I was going to talk about and who was going to collide with who. But what I have taken my task as being this morning is really to try and do a little kind of scene setter for the day. And what I wanted to talk about very briefly was the way in which changes in technology and changes in the cultural applications of technology always arouse expectations that they're going to happen much faster than they do happen, but they nearly always have far more profound long-term consequences than any of the people who are involved in that initial stage expect. So I just want to take 2 or 3 little stories around that, but I thought I'd start by taking some quotations from the past where people have got it wrong about technology, because although we think in this digital world it really is something utterly radically different from anything that's gone before, of course it is a story which is constantly repeating itself all through history. So a good place to start would be Louis Lumière, the inventor of cinema, who said in 1896, "This is an invention with no commercial future." He was hiring a projectionist to work for the summer, and he said to this guy, "This is a short-term job, and I cannot guarantee you a long-term job because this really is an invention with no commercial future." It was about stunts and shows, and it took 14 years before the first feature film was made, and in 1910. And the people who drove the first feature film were not the creative people or the technicians who had created cinema. They were the marketeers. They were the people in the States. All the films were being made in Europe, but a group of basically clothing manufacturers in New York, Jewish clothing manufacturers in New York, had this great idea that on Sundays, when the factories weren't working, they could do little film shows and charge people a nickel to get in. And the quality of product was not good enough, and they began to agitate for better product. And they are the people who drove that change, not the creators and technicians who didn't foresee the huge cultural and commercial impact of cinema. And for me, that's a little statement of the fact that however hard we try, we're inevitably working in the paradigms of the old, and we find it very difficult to make a leap into the new. So my second little quote is from Einstein, who, when he was asked if he could explain the research program that he was engaged in, he said, "If I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't call it research," which seemed to me a really cool line and something which is worth bearing in mind. I think we get innovation and creativity mixed up very easily in our society, and certainly when governments are thinking about policy and financiers are thinking about what they're going to do with their money, it's much safer to be talking about innovation. It seems to me innovation is what good Japanese car companies do. You know, they build on what they've already got and they make it a little bit better, a little bit better. Creativity, real creativity, is absolutely about disruption, and it's about the cussed lateral thinker who's completely kicking over what went before. Echo Eschen, who runs the ICA, said creativity is the antithesis of process the other day. And I think when people are trying to build businesses, one of the things that the temptation is always to keep developing what is already going on there, not looking for what is genuinely disruptive. And that takes me to a third little quote. This is Alan Greenspan, who ran the Federal Reserve in the US for a long time, who said, if I've made myself entirely clear to you, that's because you've not understood what I'm saying. And so we may have bought into the new paradigm, but lots of other people may not have done. And for me, 2 things come out of that. One is, if you've got an idea and you can't sell it because people don't get it, that does not mean it's a bad idea. At some point you have to sell it, yes, but as long as you keep working with it and don't abandon it, that is the really important thing. And those little ideas that seem completely bonkers but just go on niggling away need to be explored and need to be examined. And again, when one is caught in the process of developing a new idea, a new technology, a new game, a new business, whatever it is, taking the time out to be properly disruptive, to follow that little niggle that you've got, however mad it may be, is a temptation that one should always succumb to. By doing nothing, you have the time to do everything. And I think if you're dealing in creative businesses, that's an incredibly important rule to adopt. So my next, I will pull all these little things together at the end. I just wanted to start with these few little stories, and then I'll get on to what I was really going to say. Brecht, who was the greatest creative genius in theatre in the 20th century, said the first law of creativity is theft, which it goes against the kind of thing that makes every major entertainment corporation lawyer feel ill. And what he was talking about was not theft in the sense of borrowing other people's ideas about how you did things, but that there are basic core narratives and stories that drive everything that we do. And if you think about Brecht's work, all of it was picking up the old established core stories of human history and reinterpreting them. And I think that's what he meant by saying that the first law of creativity is theft. You borrow from what's there. So while it's about being disruptive, it's also about picking up what is around you. And just taking that first law of creativity is theft a little bit further, here's an even better quote: "Kill all the lawyers." I came across the other day. That's Shakespeare in Henry IV, Part 2. That's something which I guess a lot of people who've worked in the creative businesses have two thoughts. One is that they want to protect their intellectual property very vigorously and very rigorously. But for a lot of people, they couldn't care less. And if you look at the history of Shakespeare, here's a man who never bothered to defend any of his intellectual property, never bothered to finish a script properly, stole mercilessly, turned things upside down, sucked up to the censors, was a complete pragmatist in everything he did in the way that he drove his business. And yet, 400 years later, the contribution that he has made, although he didn't make himself a wealthy man, is absolutely colossal. So I do think that one of the things that we need to look at, and I'm going to come on to this now, is in this new world that we're in, where clearly the ways in which we've protected intellectual property and the way we value intellectual property simply do not work anymore. We've got to think in the most radical way how we're going to rebuild and reassess the value of what we're doing. So with those little kind of observations about how creative people have responded to change in the past, I wanted to go on to three points really about the kind of collisions that I think we need to be thinking about. I was listening to Paul Greengrass, the film director, talking about making Bourne Ultimatum a little while ago. And if you've seen it, there's a fantastic sequence in Waterloo Station where the CIA are trying to kill the informant. And when they were shooting the scene, he arranged for a noisy and dummy film unit to be working at one end of Waterloo Station, and the real film was being shot at the other end of the concourse with little handheld cameras, very quick takes, crew melting back into the crowd. But of course, lots of kids have already got wise to that way of filmmakers working, so they thought, well, if the film is being shot down there, obviously the interesting thing's happening up the other end, so they all went up the other end and were filming with their cameras, taking little video clips of what was going on in the real action. He said that when he got home in the evening, he was discovering that on Facebook and Bebo, kids who'd been filming the scenes that he'd been filming that day had made their own edits, laid their own music tracks on them, and were sticking them up on the net. And so from his point of view as a filmmaker, he said he was borrowing the work of all these amateur filmmakers in the creation of his own film. And he said, how do I rate this in terms of protecting and defending what I'm trying to do? I mean, these people are, rather than being prosecuted for any kind of piracy, they really deserve to have a piece of the action when it comes to the film being made.